The Voltharian collective had ruled the stars for 10,000 years. They had conquered 347 species across 3 galactic arms. Their warships numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Their soldiers were bred for battle, and their commanders had never tasted defeat. When their scouts first detected the small blue planet called Earth, High Commandant HFY barely looked up from his war table. "Another primitive world," he said with a wave of his clawed hand. "Add it to the conquest list." His advisors brought him data about the species that lived there. Humans, they called themselves. They were soft creatures made of flesh and bone. They had no natural weapons, no armored skin, no psychic abilities. They fought among themselves constantly, divided into hundreds of nations that squabbled over patches of dirt. Their technology was laughable. Chemical rockets, nuclear weapons, radio signals that leaked into space like the cries of lost children. HFY studied the reports and laughed. His laugh was a terrible sound, like metal scraping against stone. In his 300 years of conquest, he had broken species far more advanced than this one. The humans would fall within days, perhaps hours. "Send 12,000 ships," he ordered. "That should be more than enough for these animals." The Voltharian fleet assembled at the edge of the solar system. Their vessels were massive things of black metal and purple energy. Each warship stretched for kilometers, bristling with weapons that could crack planets open like eggs. The fleet moved inward like a dark cloud, swallowing the stars. Earth's governments detected the approaching armada 3 days before arrival. Panic spread across the planet. World leaders held emergency meetings. Military forces scrambled to prepare defenses that everyone knew would be useless. Some people prayed. Others ran. Many simply waited for the end. The invasion began at dawn over the Pacific Ocean. The Voltharian ships descended through the clouds like falling mountains. Their weapons fired in unison, and the sky turned to fire. Earth's orbital stations vanished in the first minute. Satellites exploded into clouds of debris. The few human warships that rose to meet the invaders lasted less than an hour. HFY watched the battle from his command throne aboard the flagship Eternal Dominion. He felt nothing but boredom. This was not even a challenge. The human weapons bounced harmlessly off Voltharian shields. Their missiles were swatted from the sky like insects. Their fighter jets burned and fell like leaves in autumn. "Target their population centers," HFY commanded. "Show them the price of resistance." The bombardment lasted for 6 hours. When it ended, the great cities of Earth lay in ruins. New York was a crater filled with ash. London burned for 3 days straight. Beijing, Moscow, Tokyo, Mumbai all reduced to rubble and smoke. The death toll climbed into the hundreds of millions before anyone stopped counting. Voltharian ground forces landed across every continent. They were tall creatures, nearly 3 meters in height, with gray skin like stone and 4 arms that ended in razor claws. They moved through the devastation without mercy, rounding up survivors and crushing any who fought back. HFY broadcast his demands across every remaining frequency. His face appeared on every screen that still functioned, a nightmare of sharp angles and cold eyes. "Creatures of Earth," he announced, "your resistance has ended. Your governments have fallen. Your military forces are destroyed. You have 2 choices. Surrender unconditionally and serve the Voltharian collective as slaves, or continue to resist and face complete extinction. You have 1 rotation of your planet to decide." He ended the transmission and turned to his advisors with a thin smile. "They will surrender," he said confidently. "They always do." But HFY had made a terrible mistake. He had studied humanity's weapons and found them primitive. He had analyzed their history and seen only chaos, division, and endless war. He believed these were weaknesses. He thought a species that fought itself so viciously would surely break when faced with a superior enemy. He was wrong. What HFY failed to understand was simple but important. Humanity had spent its entire existence at war. They had fought over land, over resources, over ideas, over nothing at all. Every generation had known battle. Every culture had warrior traditions. War was not something humans feared. It was something they understood better than any other species in the galaxy. And a species forged in perpetual conflict does not break easily. In the ruins of Washington, a young sergeant named Marcus Cole pulled himself from the rubble of a collapsed building. His unit was dead. His city was gone. Above him, Veltharian ships hung in the sky like dark gods. He had every reason to give up. Instead, he picked up his rifle and started walking in the burning remains of Lagos. General Amara Okonkwo gathered the survivors of her command. They had lost everything: their base, their vehicles, 90% of their soldiers. She looked at the frightened faces around her and made a decision. "We are not done," she told them. "We are just beginning." In a hidden bunker beneath the Swiss Alps, Dr. Victor Harlan stared at the wreckage of a crashed Veltharian scout ship. His hands trembled with exhaustion and fear, but his mind was already working, analyzing, planning. If he could understand their technology, perhaps he could turn it against them. Across the shattered earth, similar scenes played out in 1,000 places. Soldiers who refused to die. Scientists who refused to stop thinking. Ordinary people who refused to kneel. They had no communication, no leadership, no plan. But they had something the Veltharian had never encountered before. They had rage. The deadline passed. Humanity did not surrender. HFY frowned at the reports coming from his ground forces. Resistance was continuing across every continent. Scattered, disorganized, but stubborn. His soldiers were being attacked by survivors using stolen weapons, improvised explosives, even their bare hands. It was annoying. It was unexpected. "Increase the pressure," he ordered. "They will learn their place." He did not know it yet, but this was the moment everything changed. This was the moment humanity stopped being victims and started becoming something else entirely. In bunkers and basements, in ruins and refugee camps, in forests and mountains and caves, survivors began to whisper a single word to each other. It passed from person to person like a flame spreading through dry grass. A simple word. A human word. Resist. And deep within the earth, in places the Veltharian had not yet discovered, humanity began to plan its revenge. 3 years passed. 3 years of blood and fire and death. 3 years that would later be called the bleeding years by those who survived them. The Veltharian had expected the occupation to be simple. They had conquered hundreds of worlds before this one. The pattern was always the same. Break the military, destroy the cities, install a government of obedient servants. Within months, every species they had conquered learned to bow their heads and accept their new masters. Humanity refused to follow the pattern. General Amara Okonkwo had spent those 3 years building something from nothing. She moved constantly, never staying in one place for more than a few days. She traveled to the ruins of Africa, then Europe, then Asia, gathering survivors wherever she found them. Former soldiers, farmers, teachers, doctors, children who had grown up knowing nothing but war. She turned them all into fighters. The Human Resistance Front started with 50 people in a collapsed mine in what used to be Nigeria. By the end of the first year, it had grown to 5,000. By the end of the third year, it numbered over 200,000 active fighters spread across 4 continents. They fought with whatever they could find. Stolen Veltharian weapons became prized treasures passed from hand to hand. Human rifles were modified and improved with alien technology. Bombs were built from scraps of metal and chemicals harvested from destroyed factories. The resistance learned to strike fast and disappear faster, bleeding the occupation forces with 1,000 small wounds. The Veltharian could not understand it. Every time they crushed one resistance cell, 2 more appeared. Every time they burned a village suspected of hiding rebels, the survivors joined the fight. Human beings did not behave like any species they had conquered before. They did not grow tired. They did not lose hope. They only grew angrier. In orbit above Earth, Captain Li Wei commanded what remained of humanity's space forces. Her fleet was a joke compared to the Veltharian Armada's 17 battered ships held together with repairs and prayers. They hid among the asteroid belt, moving constantly to avoid detection. But Li Wei was clever, and her crews were desperate. They struck at supply convoys, destroyed isolated patrol ships, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. The damage they caused was small, but the message was large. Humanity was still fighting, even in space. Zyrith Vyre grew frustrated. He had expected this planet to be pacified within months. Instead, he was losing soldiers every day to an enemy that should not exist anymore. His superiors in the collective were beginning to ask questions. Why was this taking so long? What was wrong with these humans? He ordered brutal reprisals. Entire regions were burned. Millions more died. The Veltharian believed that terror would break humanity's spirit. They were wrong again. In a hidden facility buried deep beneath the Siberian ice, Dr. Victor Harlan had been working for 3 years on a project that consumed his every waking moment. He had started with wreckage from crashed Veltharian ships. Piece by piece, he had learned to understand their technology, their weapons, their shields, their power sources. The power sources fascinated him most of all. The Veltharian used something they called stellar cores, small devices that contained energy harvested from dying stars. Each core held more power than 100 nuclear reactors. The technology was far beyond anything humanity had ever created. But Victor Harlan was not an ordinary scientist. He had been called a genius before the invasion. He had also been called dangerous, reckless, obsessed. He had lost his family in the first bombardment, and that loss had burned away everything in him except a cold, patient hatred. He did not just want to understand Veltharian technology. He wanted to surpass it. For 3 years, he experimented. He failed 1,000 times. Explosions killed several of his assistants. Radiation poisoned his own body. He did not stop. He could not stop. The faces of his dead wife and children haunted his dreams and drove him forward. Then, on a frozen night in the 3rd year of occupation, he finally succeeded. He discovered that the stellar cores operated on a specific frequency, a vibration that ran through their crystalline structure. By manipulating that frequency, he could amplify the power output far beyond what the Veltharian thought possible. The technology could be scaled up. It could be weaponized. It could be turned into something that would make humanity's enemies tremble. Victor Harlan sat alone in his laboratory, staring at his calculations. His hands were shaking, not from cold, not from fear, but from excitement. He understood now what humanity needed to do. They could not just fight back. They could not just resist. They needed to strike so hard that the Veltharian would never recover. They needed to build something that would change the war forever. He reached for his communication device and sent an encrypted message through the resistance network. It took 2 weeks to reach General Okonkwo, passing through dozens of hands, transmitted through hidden channels that the Veltharian had never found. When Okonkwo received the message, she read it 3 times. Then she gathered her most trusted advisors and showed them what Dr. Harlan had written. The room fell silent. "Is this possible?" someone asked. "He says it is," Okonkwo replied. "And if Victor Harlan says something is possible, I believe him." She looked around at the tired, scarred faces of her commanders. These were people who had lost everything. They had watched their families die, their cities burn, their world fall. They had every reason to give up. None of them had. "This changes everything," she said quietly. "If we can do what he suggests, we do not just win this war. We end it, forever." The decision was made that night. Resources began flowing towards Siberia through 100 secret channels. Resistance fighters escorted convoys of supplies through enemy territory. Scientists and engineers were smuggled from all over the world to join Dr. Harlan's team. The project needed a name. Someone suggested calling it after the ancient god who gave fire to humanity. Prometheus. Project Prometheus had begun, and somewhere in orbit, aboard his flagship, Zarathvor felt something strange. It was a cold feeling in his chest, like a shadow passing over his heart. He did not know what it meant. He would learn soon enough. The Siberian facility stretched for kilometers beneath the frozen earth. Before the invasion, it had been a mining complex. Now it was humanity's greatest secret and last hope. Dr. Victor Harlan stood on a platform, overlooking the main construction chamber. Below him, 10,000 workers moved like ants around a skeleton of metal that rose toward the cavern ceiling. It was only half complete, but already it was the largest thing humanity had ever built. 2 years had passed since Project Prometheus began. 2 years of impossible work, terrible sacrifices, and slow progress that sometimes felt like no progress at all. But the skeleton was taking shape. Day by day, piece by piece, humanity was building its answer to the stars. General Okonkwo arrived at the facility on a cold morning in the 5th year of occupation. She had traveled for 3 weeks through enemy territory to get here, moving at night, hiding during the day, trusting her life to resistance guides who knew paths the Veltharian had never found. When she saw what they were building, she stopped walking and simply stared. "My God," she whispered. Victor Harlan smiled. It was the first time he had smiled in years. "Not God," he said. "Something better. Something human?" He led her through the facility, explaining everything as they walked. The skeleton was made from a new alloy they had created by combining meteorite iron with metals, harvested from Veltharian wreckage. It was stronger than anything either species had ever produced. Nothing could break it. Nothing could melt it. Nothing could stop it. The power source was even more impressive. Harlan had taken 12 captured stellar cores and linked them together in a configuration the Veltharian had never imagined. The result was a reactor that burned with the fury of a small star, contained within a chamber of crystallized carbon that Harlan had invented himself. "The power output is enormous," Harlan explained, his eyes bright with pride. "More than enough to run weapons and shields that would make the Veltharian fleet look like toys." The weapons were still being designed, but Harlan showed Okonkwo the plans. Beam weapons that could cut through Veltharian armor like paper. Missile systems that could track and destroy 100 targets at once. A shield generator that could absorb orbital bombardment without failing. But it was the machine itself that captured Okonkwo's attention. The final design called for a walking war machine that would stand 200 meters tall. It would be shaped roughly like a human: 2 legs, 2 arms, a central body, a head that contained sensors and command systems. It was a machine built in humanity's image, scaled up to godlike proportions. "Why this shape?" Okonkwo asked. "Why not a ship, a tank? Something more practical?" Harlan was quiet for a moment before answering. "Because this is not just a weapon," he said. "It is a symbol. When the Veltharians see it, they will see humanity standing against them. When our people see it, they will see themselves, larger, stronger, unbreakable. We need to win this war, General. But we also need to inspire our people to keep fighting until we do." Okonkwo understood. She had spent 5 years watching humanity suffer and die. She knew that hope was as important as weapons. Maybe more important. What about the armor? She asked. Harlan led her to another section of the facility, where massive plates of metal were being forged in furnaces that burned hotter than the surface of the sun. The metal that came out of those furnaces was unlike anything Okonkwo had ever seen. It gleamed with a bright, warm color that seemed to glow from within. Gold, she said quietly. Not exactly, Harlan replied. It is the alloy I mentioned, treated with a process we discovered by accident. The molecular structure changed during the final heating phase. It made the metal even stronger than before, and it gave it this color. He picked up a small piece of the finished armor and handed it to Okonkwo. It was warm in her hands, and it seemed to catch the light in ways that made it look almost alive. The soldiers have started calling it the Golden Behemoth, Harlan said. I think the name fits. Over the following months, Okonkwo divided her time between the facility and the resistance forces outside. The war continued. People died every day. The Veltharian grew more brutal as the occupation dragged on. But now there was something to work toward, a reason to keep fighting beyond simple survival. Every resource the resistance could gather flowed toward Siberia. Captured weapons, stolen fuel cells, salvage metals. Resistance cells across the world sent whatever they could spare, even when they could spare nothing. Scientists and engineers arrived in small groups, having traveled thousands of kilometers through enemy territory to contribute their knowledge. Captain Li Wei and her orbital fleet played a crucial role. They intercepted Veltharian supply ships and stole cargo that the facility needed. They lost half their remaining vessels doing it, but they never stopped. The Golden Behemoth grew. Its skeleton was completed. Its armor was attached, plate by golden plate. Its weapons were installed. Its power core hummed to life, filling the cavern with a sound like a beating heart. Victor Harlan worked himself nearly to death. The radiation from the power core was slowly killing him, but he refused to stop. He slept only a few hours each night. He ate only when others forced him to. His hair turned white. His hands developed a constant tremor. He did not care. He would see this finished or die trying. On the day the Golden Behemoth was completed, Harlan stood on the platform one last time and looked at what humanity had built. It filled the entire cavern, a golden giant standing silent and waiting. Its eyes were dark. Its weapons were cold. But it was ready. General Okonkwo stood beside him. It is magnificent, she said. It is necessary, Harlan replied. But yes, it is also magnificent. He turned to face her, and she saw the exhaustion and illness written on his face. She also saw something else, satisfaction, peace, perhaps even joy. The machine is ready, he said. But it cannot win this war alone. We need a plan. Okonkwo nodded. She had been working on that plan for months. The machine is the spear, she said. But humanity will be the army behind it. When the behemoth rises, every resistance cell on Earth will attack at the same time. The Veltharian will face war on every front. They will not be able to respond. She looked up at the golden giant that represented everything humanity had left. We strike in 30 days. The morning sky over Siberia was gray and heavy with clouds. Snow fell in thick curtains across the frozen landscape. Veltharian patrol ships moved through the air in lazy patterns, scanning the ground below for any sign of resistance activity. They had been doing this for 5 years. They had never found anything important in this frozen wasteland. They were about to be very surprised. Deep beneath the ice, General Amara Okonkwo sat in the command center of the Golden Behemoth. The interior was cramped but functional, filled with screens and controls that combined human and Veltharian technology. A pilot's chair stood at the center, connected to the neural interface that would allow a single operator to control the massive machine. The chair was empty for now. Okonkwo would take it when the time came. Around her, a small crew of technicians ran final checks on every system. Dr. Victor Harlan sat at a monitoring station, his thin body wrapped in blankets against a chill that never seemed to leave him now. He watched the power readings with tired, satisfied eyes. "All systems are stable," he reported. "The behemoth is ready." Okonkwo nodded and opened the communication channel. This channel connected to every resistance cell on Earth through a network of hidden relays that had taken years to build. When she spoke, her words would reach 200,000 fighters waiting in the shadows. "This is General Okonkwo," she said. "The hour has come. Remember your training. Remember your orders. Remember everyone we have lost. Today, we take back our world." She closed the channel and took her place in the pilot's chair. The neural interface connected to her mind, and suddenly she could feel the behemoth as if it were her own body. She felt its power humming through her veins. She felt its weapons ready to fire. She felt 200 meters of golden metal waiting to move at her command. "Open the launch tunnel," she ordered. The ceiling of the cavern began to split apart. Massive doors that had been hidden beneath layers of ice and snow groaned open, revealing the gray morning sky above. SciFi War was on his flagship when the alarms began. At first, he thought it was a malfunction. The sensors were showing an enormous power signature erupting from the Siberian wilderness, something larger than any human technology could produce. Then visual feeds from patrol ships started arriving, and he saw what was rising from the earth. It was gold. It was huge. It was shaped like a human being, but it was 200 meters tall, and it blazed against the gray sky like a piece of the sun brought down to earth. It moved with terrible grace, each step shaking the ground for kilometers around. SciFi stared at the images and felt something he had not felt in 300 years of conquest. Fear. "All units engage immediately," he screamed into his communication system. "Destroy that thing." The Valtharian responded with overwhelming force. Patrol ships opened fire. Orbital weapons began charging. Ground forces mobilized from bases across the continent. Within minutes, enough firepower to level a city was concentrated on the golden behemoth. It did not matter. The behemoth's shields activated, and a dome of golden energy surrounded the machine. Weapons fire that should have torn it apart simply vanished against that barrier. The behemoth kept walking, kept moving westward, unstoppable and unafraid. Then it returned fire. Okonkwo felt the weapons as extensions of her own hands. She raised the behemoth's arms, and beams of concentrated stellar energy shot forth, cutting through the sky like fingers of light. Patrol ships exploded. A carrier that had been descending to engage was sliced in half and fell burning to the earth. In the first 5 minutes of battle, the behemoth destroyed more Valtharian vessels than the entire human resistance had managed in 5 years. And across the world, humanity rose. In the ruins of Paris, resistance fighters emerged from the ancient tunnels beneath the city and attacked the Valtharian garrison. In Tokyo, cells that had been hiding for years struck at the occupation headquarters with stolen weapons and homemade bombs. In Cairo, in Sydney, in Mexico City, in 1,000 places at once, humans who had been waiting and watching and preparing finally moved. The Valtharian were not prepared for this. They had designed their occupation forces to control a beaten population, not to fight a war on every front simultaneously. Their communications became chaotic as reports of attacks flooded in from every continent. Their commanders did not know where to send reinforcements. Their soldiers were suddenly surrounded by enemies who knew the terrain better than they did. Captain Li Wei and her orbital fleet struck at the same moment. They had been hiding in the asteroid belt, waiting for this signal.
'Waiting for this signal.' 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 'W
waiting for this signal. Now they emerged and attacked the Veltharian supply lines with everything they had. The few ships they had left fought like demons, destroying transports and communication relays, cutting the occupation forces off from reinforcement. HFY watched his empire crumble and could not understand what was happening. This should not be possible. The humans were primitive. They were beaten. They were supposed to be slaves. Send everything to Siberia, he ordered. Kill that machine. Kill it now. But the golden behemoth could not be killed. Okonkwo marched westward, destroying everything in her path. Veltharian ground forces tried to stop her and were crushed beneath golden feet. Aircraft attacked from every angle and were swatted from the sky. Even orbital bombardment failed. The behemoth's shields held against weapons that could have cracked open mountains. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Veltharian collective was losing dot as night fell over Europe. The behemoth stood among the burning wreckage of what had been the largest Veltharian base on the continent. Okonkwo allowed herself a moment to rest, to feel the exhaustion pressing against her mind. The neural interface was draining, and the battle had lasted for hours, but she could not stop yet. The war was not over. HFY still lived, and his flagship still hung in orbit above Europe. Like a dark promise. Dr. Harlan's voice came through the communication system. He sounded weak but triumphant. You did it, General. You broke their lines. Their ground forces are retreating across every continent. Okonkwo looked up at the sky, at the dark shape of the Eternal Dominion visible through the clouds. Not yet, she said. We are not done until we finish this completely. She checked the power readings. The behemoth had used enormous amounts of energy, but the stellar cores were still burning strong. There was enough left for what needed to be done. Geneva, she said. That is where their command center is. That is where we end this. The golden behemoth began to walk again, leaving fire and freedom in its wake.